Welcome to Chapter 3, Juvenile Delinquency, Juvenile Justice. We're talking about individual views of delinquency. Go over the choice and trait theory. So when we're talking about choice theory, this suggests that juvenile offenders are rational decision makers who choose to engage in antisocial activity. Cesar Becerra and Jeremy Bentham talked about how delinquent behavior is a rational choice that's made by a motivated offender who perceives that the chance of gain outweigh any possible punishment or thought. Trait theory is a little bit different and suggests that delinquent behavior is a product of personal problems or conditions. So many forms of delinquency, such as drug abuse and violence, may appear more impulsive than rational. So when we are talking about choice theory, we're talking about the concepts of delinquent and delinquency being considered separately. Delinquents also seem to choose the place of the crime. So for this idea of having free will, that's this opportunity where we're talking about, do we all have free will to make choices, or is that something that we are forced into doing or don't have the option to be able to make that decision? And people have very varying opinions on that. So when we talk about economic need and opportunity, we know that kids may choose to engage in some sort of delinquency. And when we look at why that might happen, we know that the more opportunities they have to commit those crimes or to be involved in those crimes, the more likely they will. So when we're talking about that opportunity that comes along for them to do that. So, but we need to also remember that even though those that have that economic need or opportunity, even those kids that don't necessarily aren't surrounded by it, like are from affluent families, they still do choose to break the law. So routine activities theory was developed by Lawrence Cohen and Marcus Felsen, and this suggested that volume and distribution of these crimes in a particular area and at a particular time is influenced by three different variables. It's the availability of suitable targets, such as homes and sellable goods. Then the absence of suitable guardians. So I will talk over and over and over about what happens between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock at night. Babies are made, teen pregnancies, and crimes are broken because that is the time from when kids get out of school to when parents get done with work. So when there is absence of capable guardians, such as, the homeowners and police and security in the area, that falls into this idea of routine activities theory. Motivated offenders, and you can see this graphic on your screen, but motivated offenders, such as unemployed teenagers, can often also be have high levels of being involved with these routine activities theories. So if the number of teenagers in a given population exceeds the number of available part-time or after-school jobs, there's a supply of motivated offenders that might increase. So we're going to talk about choice theory and how it works with delinquency prevention. So if in fact is a rational choice and a routine activity, then prevention is simply a matter of convincing potential delinquents that they will be punished for committing delinquent acts. And some strategies that we use are general deterrence, and that is where delinquent acts can be controlled by the threat of punishment. And the concept is really simple, you guys. People will commit crimes if they believe they're going to be successful. That's general deterrence. People will commit crimes if they feel like they will be successful. And when we talk about what guides deterrence, we're looking at what is the severity of the punishment, what is the certainty of the punishment, and the swiftness of the punishment. You will hear that over and over in many different criminal justice classes when we're talking about this idea of deterrence. And so there's evidence that supports that adolescents who perceive that they're going to get arrested, they will probably forego committing that crime. So the problem is that there is little evidence that punitive measures alone are going to deter future delinquency, and they may actually increase the likelihood of new crimes. So specific deterrence, and according to this theory, if young offenders are punished severely, the experience will convince them not to repeat illegal acts. So this is this idea of learning from your mistakes, right? So if we punish that one person that committed something severely, are they going to learn from these acts and then in turn not commit crimes again? So some of the issues that we have when we're talking about strict deterrence is that, and this goes into what I often think when I think of that rational choice theory, the choice theory, is that minors, we know, are not rational. That thinking, that critical thinking that happens when decisions are being made are not often happening at the adolescent level. So we have to keep that in mind when we talk about this idea of prevention when we're talking about choice theory. So we know that all of these other things that are listed here on the slide, talking about, not fearing legal consequences or not fearing getting arrested, being involved in drugs and alcohol, all of that really can play into how we prevent delinquency at the level of this choice theory. Okay, so maybe this theory is not keying in on what choices we need to look at, and that's important. So there's little question that, that some, but not all of delinquent offenders are making rational choices. And while the rational offenders certainly exist, there may also be a class of offenders who are just desperate people who commit crimes because they really don't have any other reasonable alternatives. So let's talk about a few of the trait theories, biosocial and psychological views. Anytime we're talking about, causation, we always look at, the person, biosocial, psychological, what's going on, what are the traits that are going on within that person. So let's look at this. So the origins of trait theory came from Cesare Lombroso, 1835 to 1909. I'm sure that many of you have heard of him. He was an Italian physician, and he really looked at delinquency and the delinquent behavior, not just with juveniles, but with adults as well. So the source of this behavioral control that we're talking about really has some main differences when we're looking at trait theories and choice theories. So although both views of it focus on the individual, the choice theorist views delinquents as rational and self-serving decision makers. Now, the trait theorists view their decisions as uncontrollable byproducts of personal traits or experiences. So choice theory, where there's really a rational decision-making process, trait theory is more about this uncontrollable byproduct of someone's traits. So again, Cesare Lombroso, father of criminology, he developed these theories. And he said that delinquents manifest physical anomalies that make them similar to their primitive ancestors. So you have to remember, guys, that let's look at that time period, 1835 to 1909. So even when we're looking at racial differences, there was a lot of stuff going on in this time that talked about, the size of people's heads and different biological traits that led to delinquency. But most of this research that was going on was focusing on social factors, so poverty and family life. So so when we look at biosocial, we're looking at that association between biological makeup, environmental conditions, and antisocial behaviors. So biosocial theories of delinquency. And there are 3 areas of biosocial theories that we're going to talk about. The first is biochemical factors. And biochemical problems and factors begin at conception when the mothers ingest harmful substances. So an example of this would be maternal alcohol abuse, so fetal alcohol syndrome. And we can see that there's been links to prenatal damage and subsequent antisocial behavior. I'm going to talk about that. There's a great Netflix documentary about a girl with fetal alcohol syndrome and a crime that she committed as an adolescent. Come back to that. So environmental contamination has also been associated with lower IQs and greater distractibility in adolescents. There is also other things that come into play, and that can be, diet or hormone levels, other exposures that may have play a role in the chemical makeup of these youths as they're coming through. Now, neurological dysfunction, this is going to help to explain kind of how the brain and nervous system of these offenders are working. So we're looking at genetic influences and some configurations that predispose youth to aggression. So biosocial theorists believe that antisocial behavior characteristics and these mental health disorders can also be passed from adult to child. So antisocial behavior is definitely thought to be inherited. We know there are some strong genetic influences. Parental deviance is a powerful influence on delinquent behavior. Many studies have found that there's a significant number of delinquent youths also have criminal fathers. There's also been looks at twin studies, and if crime is an inherited trait, then identical twins should be quite similar, right? Well, there has been studies that have looked at this. This is the nature versus nurture portion of it. So psychological theories of delinquency is just looking more into the psychology. And we know that some experts view delinquency as being symptomatic of a deeper psychological problem. I buy into this for sure, in my opinion. Studies of incarcerated youths indicate that their personalities are marked by antisocial characteristics. So delinquent behavior occurs among youths in every racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic group. And psychologists view this as a function of mental disturbances rather than being caused really by social factors. There is some theories that go along with that. We're going to talk about 3 prominent psychological perspectives. The first is psychodynamic theory. And then we have behavioral theory, cognitive theory. And so this graphic is great to show you about some of the processes, the theories, and the causes that go into this. You might want to study this a little more on your own to understand the causes that come out of this theory. They're important and they're good. So attachment, let's look at, I don't know if this goes. Yeah, it does go into it. Good. This is what I wanted to know. So psychodynamic theory, when we talk about psychodynamic theories, think Sigmund Freud. And this really talks about human personality being controlled by unconscious mental processes. And there's the id, the ego, the superego. We're not going to go into this too much. Freud is a little cuckoo. but he does have some interesting theories that talks about imbalances in personality and things that happen in early childhood, which we do know and can buy into there being some long-term psychological difficulties there. So behavioral theories, the argument there is that personality is learned, and it's learned from the interactions that we have with other people. So true. And so that really brings us to behaviorism. And so this is the idea that when you're learning and your personality is developing, you're having interactions with other people. So if dad steals cars because that's just what he does, then why would you do any different as a child? Behavioral theory goes right along with social learning theory. And these sociologists, psychologists, criminologists, whoever's doing the research, really know that there's this learning of sociological experiences, and there can be expectations, and some of these are going to determine our behavior. So we know that children are going to model behavior according to what the reactions are that they receive. I'm going to go back to this, that they receive from their behavior. All right, so let's talk about cognitive theory. So understand, you guys, that cognitive is just a really big fancy word for brain, for thinking, not sorry, brain, but thinking. So cognitive psychology studies, it's a branch of psychology, and it studies the perception of reality and the mental processes that are required to understand the world we live in. Some law violators may be sensation seekers who are constantly looking for experiences, where others will lack this sense of deliberation, and they're really not going to think about problems thoroughly. And these theorists who study this information processing, they explain these antisocial behaviors in terms of perception and analysis of data. And so the treatment is based on your brain and your thoughts, your cognition being like a computer, like an information processing system. And it acknowledges that people are more likely to respond aggressively when their thoughts stir up feelings of anger. So personality may be defined as the stable patterns of behavior, including thoughts and emotions, which distinguish one person from another. And through this, we see that personality reflects characteristic ways of adapting to life's demands. The way we behave is definitely a function of our personality. So juvenile delinquents who are believed to be substandard in intelligence and thus more likely to commit crimes than more intelligent persons. And this is where we look at nature versus nurture. With nature, intelligence is inherited, and it's just part of your genetic makeup. And with nurture, we know that intelligence is determined by environmental stimulation and socialization. So there is a difference here when we're talking about the intelligence that youth have and their decision making to commit crimes. So let's talk about delinquency prevention when we're talking about trait theory. To finish out, trait theory perspectives on delinquency suggest that prevention efforts should be directed at strengthening youth's home life and relationships. And that makes perfect sense, because if we're looking at an individual's traits, we want to look at where they come from. What is shaping their decision making? And that is through their home life and their relationships. And with that, we look at a child's health and well-being. And we know that intervention programs are aimed really at the family well-being. Family court, when a juvenile is arrested and goes through that process, they're going to involve the family in it. There's going to be a lot of family-based interventions that are going to help to work with not only the youth, but the parents as a whole. That does it for Chapter 3. And I hope you guys enjoy this lecture. Let me know if you have questions.